Hi everyone, welcome once again to the virtual learning program prepared by Rainbow International School. Today we shall be discussing the third chapter of David Copperfield, written by Charles Dickens. Okay, so in chapter 3 we have this title, David the Orphan. The settings are at Salem House in London, Blunderstone, Suffolk, east of England, and at the Bottle Warehouse in London. Okay, this is the Bottle Warehouse in London. It's part of the warehouse, and you will see David sitting there, seemingly sad and tired. Okay, let's see what happens in chapter 3. But before that, let's continue with the other story elements which we may extract from chapter 3. The next is the set of characters. In addition to the characters we have met in chapters 1 and 2, we have now 4 new characters. Mr. Micawber, an unsuccessful businessman. Mrs. Micawber, his wife. Mr. Kenyon, the manager at the Bottle Warehouse. And Mrs. Crickle, the wife of Mr. Crickle, the headmaster of Salem House, and she's the one who told David that his mom has passed away. So we have Mr. Micawber here, Mrs. Micawber there, and Mr. Kenyon and Mrs. Crickle here. Okay. Now let's try to deal with the summary. Okay, before we go along with some slides. Okay, let's read all together. As just like before, we assign chapters for you to read before we deal with the presentation, so that you'll be prepared and ready, and you are aware. You somehow know what happened in the chapter. Okay, so here in this chapter, we may read, Mrs. Crickle was the one who told David that his mother had died. Upon reaching Blunderstone, he saw the bodies of his mom and little baby brother. After the funeral, Peggotty was told that she was no longer needed by the Murdstones, so she left and she took David with her to Yarmouth. The time when David had to leave for Blunderstone, Peggotty had become Mrs. Barkis, so they got married. The cart driver, remember, Mr. Barkis. Upon reaching his own house, he was told that his schooling, David's schooling, can no longer be afforded, and even at a young age, he was sent to London to work in a bottle warehouse, where he cleaned the bottles, filled them with wine, and packed them in cases. David was told by Mr. Kenyon that he would be staying in a room in London owned by Mr. Micawber. He has grown fond of the Micawbers, and he felt sad when Mr. Micawber was imprisoned for not paying his debts. And David tried to help the family in his own little way until Mr. Micawber was released. The Micawbers then decided to leave London for Devon, which made David very sad. The time David was assigned to another family, Mr. and Mrs. Tip. He then decided to go to Kent, David, to search for his father's aunt. Do you remember Aunt Betsy Trotwood? Okay, now David will try to look for Aunt Betsy in Kent, because he remembers that's where she lives, and David has 10 shillings on hand. This 10 shillings was given to him by Peggotty. Okay, let's see what happens in chapter 4 after the discussions we shall be making during this presentation. Now you will see in on page 93, you'll find questions about chapter 3. Okay, now will you please turn your book to page 93? Okay, page 93 is like It has 6 questions for us to answer. Okay, let's take the first one. You have to you can see untrue sentences in your book, and we have to rewrite them with the correct information. So it was given here. Okay, let's see here. Number 1 there. Okay, we have 6 questions, as you can see, and we have it on page 93. Okay, so the first question is, the first untrue sentence is, David went home because his mother wanted to see him. No, it's not true, because David went home because his mother had died. And for the sentence number 2, Peggotty took David to Yarmouth to stay with Mr. Barkis. No, Peggotty took David to Yarmouth to stay with her brother Daniel and the 2 orphans who were adopted by Daniel, and their names are Ham and Emily. Okay, sentence number 3, the Murdstones arranged a job for David in a lawyer's office. Oh no, the Murdstones arranged a job for David in a bottle warehouse. Okay, the fourth sentence, David was proud of his new job and enjoyed it. Let's see, David was deeply ashamed of his new job and hated it. So let's go to number 5, sentence number 5. David didn't like the Micawber family. This is not true, because David became very fond of the Micawber family. I want to mention that Mr. and Mrs. Micawber has 3 children. Okay. For number 6, the last sentence, Mr. Micawber was sent to prison because he had been in a fight. And that's not true. We all know that Mr. Micawber was sent to prison because he could not pay his debts. Okay, so let's try to go to the next slides. In this slide, you will find the comprehension questions, which I gave you last, which will be answered by you. And the answers, after writing your answers in the copybook, please send them to my account in WhatsApp and in Discord. Okay, so what happened in the household after Clara's death? That's question number 1 for chapter 3. And what happened to Peggotty on the holiday? So that's question number 2. Okay, so let's see. Here's a thank you slide, because we're about to end this video presentation. But before that, I would like to mention that as I have given you the homework the last time, okay, about in chapter 2, about the comprehensions about David's earliest memories, you remember? So I gave you another question. It's about how do we know that Peggotty loved David. Okay, let's have a short discussion of these 2 questions. What were David's earliest memories? And I know some of you have submitted to me the answers, and I'm happy that most of you have matched with the answer that we expected to hear from you. And just let me summarize the answers submitted by some of you. So here, what were David's earliest memories? Allow me to read. David remembered his mother and his nurse, Peggotty. His mother was a pretty woman who had married a much older man, and David remembered that his mother had a nice shape and pretty hair. Peggotty had no shape at all. Peggotty was very kind to David and his mother, and she loved them both very much. David remembers reading a favorite book to Peggotty. He also remembers that he was very happy during this time of his life. Okay, so let's see. How do we know that Peggotty loved David? Peggotty loved David before he was even born. She loved and cared for Mrs. Copperfield, and she was against Mrs. Copperfield's marriage to Mr. Murdstone because she knew that it would be very upsetting to David. Peggotty took David to spend 2 weeks with her family in Yarmouth when Mrs. Copperfield was marrying Mr. Murdstone. When David was sent away to school, she gave him some money and kissed him goodbye as he left. When David was in trouble, she sent him money so that he could visit his great aunt Betsy. Peggotty always kept a room ready for David so that he would always have a home. All right, that's their house in the house built by Mr. Barkis for the two of them. Okay, so now it's the thank you slides, and I'd like to thank you for staying with me. Thank you for your time, and always be careful, be safe, and happy virtual learning. Okay, bye.